Laurence Fox been in the news again. You might have seen this. He's been arrested for possibly incitement and it seems also conspiracy. So what's this about? It's to do with his support for the so-called Blade Runners, the people vandalising the ULEZ cameras. I won't get into the big debate about the merits of ULEZ or otherwise. But yeah, this is an interesting offence. We used to have a common law offence of incitement. That's gone now. And now it's covered by the Serious Crimes Act 2007, which actually creates three separate offences, but they're all very similar. They are encouraging somebody to commit a specific crime, encouraging somebody to commit a crime in a certain category, or just encouraging people to commit crimes generally. It doesn't actually matter whether anybody is encouraged or not, it's just the encouragement that ticks all the boxes. This is something that I have to be very careful of, because I do a lot of talks for activists, especially animal rights activists, like how to conduct undercover investigations and make sure the evidence is admissible if it goes to court and things like that, but also for people just protesting. And I always start out by saying, look, I don't encourage you to do any of this. And actually, I genuinely don't. I mean, actually, I don't think protest is actually particularly effective. But I have to be very careful to make sure that nobody can suggest that anything I do is encouraging somebody to do anything they wouldn't do anyway. Because that seems, that's part of the test. I mean, if it's just a state of you going, yeah, go on, I support everything you do, arguably that's not incitement, because you're not encouraging them, because they were going to do that anyway. Although, it's also a matter of fact, this, you can be encouraging your local football team by yelling support, but they would probably argue they were trying to win the match anyway. But yeah, it's a complex issue. Also, conspiracy. Conspiracy is just forming an agreement with somebody to commit an offence. I mean, technically, you can actually be charged with conspiracy for conspiring to do something that's not actually a criminal offence. But if you conspire to do it, then it becomes a criminal offence. That's mainly things like certain types of breach of contract, because it was all aimed at stopping people, in the early days of trade unionism from organising strikes and things. But again, this is something I have a lot of experience with. It's very common before demos for the police to arrest protesters for conspiracy to commit public nuisance. I mean, public nuisance is a very minor offence, but conspiracy is a very serious offence, and it allows people to confiscate materials as evidence. And this happened back in 2019, actually. I remember Extinction Rebellion. They were raided the night before a big series of protests, and all their sort of, cooking utensils and indeed the sound gear was confiscated. At the time, I was involved with something called Animal Rebellion, and I remember they were asking if they could borrow some of our equipment, and there was lots of debate about, well, hang on, if we lend them a teacup, what if they actually use real milk, or if we lend them a frying pan, they might cook bacon in it. So it's like, we'll lend you things, but we want an undertaking that you won't use any animal products. But so that's the position with Mr. Fox. I mean, it seems he's been arrested for one of these offences. But he's also said about, I can't really, see my bail conditions. And this brings up another interesting area, which is, can the police actually impose bail conditions? It's very common now for people to be arrested and then bailed under investigation. So in other words, you can go away now, we need to gather more evidence. Because there's a thing called a custody time limit clock. You can only be held for normally 24 hours, but you can extend that to 72 hours on applications to magistrates. But the police have only a certain time to either charge you or release you. But what they quite often do now is they start the investigation, then they release you, so the custody time clock doesn't count. But they impose conditions, not to go to a certain area or something like that. And like I say, there is a bit of a debate as to whether that's actually lawful. And there have been some challenges to this. And to be perfectly fair, it seems all up in the air at the moment as to whether they actually have this authority. I mean, the courts obviously have authority because it's all covered by the Bail Act. But then by that stage, you have been arrested and charged with an offence, whereas at this stage, no charges have been proffered. So yeah, so it's just an interesting one, and we'll see how this develops. And I'd be very curious to know what the actual supposed bail conditions are. I mean, if they're just things like stay out of trouble, don't commit crime. I mean, sometimes you do get that as a bail condition, not to commit a crime. It's like, well, that's illegal anyway, so it just makes it easier to remand somebody in custody if they, because you can do it sort of on suspicion. So it is very much used as a tactic just to disrupt demonstrations. It's like, well, we'll arrest everybody who's potentially involved, bail whilst under investigation. That stops them attending any of the demos, and then when all the demos are over, we'll say we're taking no further action. We're going to NFA it, as they say. So there you go. Hope you found that, as always, vaguely interesting. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I mean, like I say, there's no obligation to. I'm quite happy just to chat about these things.